powerful woman, a locked office, 3 brilliant detectives, and a killer who seems to know their every move before they even make it. When Vivian Ashworth is found dead in her art gallery, surrounded by millions in masterpieces, the police believe they have a simple case. But a single strand of hair is about to reveal that even the smartest minds can fail to see the truth right in front of them. The morning mist clung to the windows of the Ashworth Gallery like ghostly fingers, obscuring the masterpieces within. At precisely 9:47 a.m., security guard Thomas Mitchell inserted his key into the heavy oak door, expecting another routine day of protecting millions of dollars worth of art. What he found instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. Vivian Ashworth sat slumped over her mahogany desk, her silver hair cascading across scattered papers like spilled mercury. The 58-year-old art collector appeared to be sleeping, her face peaceful, almost serene. But Thomas had worked for Mrs. Ashworth for 12 years, and he knew she never arrived before 10 a.m., never worked at her desk in the gallery's main floor, and certainly never looked so still. The gallery was a temple to artistic excellence, its walls adorned with Monet's water lily, Picasso's bold abstractions, and Van Gogh's swirling starry nights. Each piece was worth more than most people's homes, yet none of them seemed to witness what had happened to their guardian. The morning light filtered through the skylight, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that felt too beautiful for the horror that had unfolded. Thomas approached slowly, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. Mrs. Ashworth, his voice cracked slightly. No response. Her coffee cup sat beside her, still warm. The morning newspaper folded precisely, as she always kept it. Everything appeared normal, yet everything felt wrong. When he finally worked up the courage to check her pulse, Thomas's hands trembled against her cold wrist. Nothing. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed 911. "I need help at the Ashworth Gallery on Meridian Street," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the dead. I think Mrs. Ashworth is dead." The first responders arrived within minutes, their sirens cutting through the morning silence like knives. Paramedic Sarah Chen rushed in, her equipment bag clattering against the marble floor. One look at Vivian's position told her everything she needed to know, but protocol demanded she check anyway. "Time of death, approximately 10:15 a.m., she announced to Officer Rodriguez, who was already securing the scene. But it was Officer Rodriguez who first noticed the peculiarities. The office door had been locked from the inside, with no other means of entry or exit. The windows were sealed and unbroken. Vivian's purse sat untouched on a nearby chair, her expensive jewelry still adorning her fingers and neck. Nothing appeared to be missing. Nothing seemed disturbed. "Natural causes," Rodriguez muttered, making notes on his pad. "Probably a heart attack or stroke. High-stress lifestyle. You know how it is with these wealthy type." But even as he spoke, something nagged at him. The scene was too perfect, too undisturbed. 20 years of police work, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were screaming that something was very wrong. The gallery's surveillance system showed Vivian entering at 9:30 a.m., exactly as she had every morning for the past 15 years. She was alone, walking with her usual confident stride, carrying her morning coffee and newspaper. The cameras showed no one else entering or leaving the building until Thomas arrived. Yet here she was, dead, in a room that seemed to have no secrets. As the morning progressed, more officials arrived. The coroner, Dr. Patricia Holbrook, examined the body with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen death in all its form. "I can't determine the cause without an autopsy," she announced. "But there are no obvious signs of trauma, no indication of struggle." The crime scene photographers captured every angle, every detail, their flashes illuminating the contrast between the beautiful artwork, grim reality of death. Evidence technicians dusted for fingerprints, finding only those that belonged to Vivian, Thomas, and the cleaning crew, who had been there the night before. But it was the small details that would later prove crucial. A single strand of hair, so fine it was nearly invisible, caught on the edge of Vivian's desk. A coffee cup positioned just slightly off from where she usually played. A pen lying on the floor, as if it had been dropped suddenly. These tiny inconsistencies would have been overlooked by most, but Detective James Chen, who would soon arrive on the scene, had built his reputation on noticing what others missed. As Dr. Holbrook supervised the removal of Vivian's body, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about to become much more complicated than anyone anticipated. The wealthy art collector had died in her locked sanctuary, surrounded by priceless beauty, with no apparent cause of death and no signs of foul play. It should have been a simple case of natural causes, but something in the air felt electric with tension, as if the very paintings were holding their breath, waiting for the truth to emerge. The call had already gone out to the department's 3 best detectives. What had started as a routine death investigation was about to become a battle of wits between some of the city's most brilliant minds and a killer who had planned the perfect crime. The game was about to begin, and none of them knew they were already several moves behind the city's darkest corners, but his sharp blue eyes still held the intensity of a man who had never met a mystery he couldn't solve. Natural death at the Ashworth Gallery. The dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio. Possible complications. Sterling knew that possible complications in police speak meant the scene wasn't as straightforward as it appeared. He grabbed his coat and headed out into the crisp morning air, his mind already working through the possibilities. Detective Elena Vasquez received the same call while reviewing psychological profile in her cramped office downtown. At 38, she was the department's go-to expert on criminal psychology, a woman who could read a suspect's deepest secrets in the way they held their shoulders or the direction they looked when answering questions. Her doctorate in forensic psychology had made her invaluable in cases where understanding the why was just as important as uncovering the how. She had joined the force after spending years as a private practice therapist, claiming that she wanted to use her skills to catch predators rather than just treat their victims. The third detective, James Chen, was in the middle of examining fiber evidence from an unrelated burglary when his phone buzzed. At 29, Chen was the youngest of the 3 but had already earned a reputation as the most meticulous crime scene analyst in the department. His background in forensic science, combined with an almost obsessive attention to detail, made him the detective other cops called when they needed someone who could find evidence that others missed. He had solved more cases through microscopic analysis than most detectives solved through traditional investigation. They arrived at the Ashworth Gallery within minutes of each other, though none of them had worked together before. The department's hierarchy rarely brought together 3 specialists of their caliber on what appeared to be a simple death investigation, but Chief Morrison had learned to trust his instincts. When something felt off about a case involving one of the city's most prominent citizens, it was better to have too much expertise than too little. Sterling was the first to approach the scene, his practiced eye immediately cataloguing the inconsistencies that Officer Rodriguez had noted. The locked door, the undisturbed office, the peaceful expression on Vivian's face. It all felt too neat, too perfect. 29 years on the force, he muttered to himself, and I've never seen a death scene this clean. Vasquez entered with a different perspective entirely. While Sterling focused on the physical evidence, she was reading the emotional landscape of the scene. The way Vivian sat suggested she had been comfortable, unsuspecting. There were no signs of fear in her posture, no indication that she had seen danger approaching. She trusted whoever was here, Vasquez said, quietly, though she was addressing no one in particular. This wasn't a stranger. Chen arrived with his forensic, immediately beginning a systematic examination that would make the others seem casual by comparison. He photographed everything from 17 different angles, collected samples of dust from surfaces that looked clean to the naked eye, and began mapping the scene with the precision of a scientist documenting a new species. The coffee cup, he announced after several minutes of analysis. It's been moved. The 3 detectives found themselves naturally gravitating toward each other, their different approaches creating an unconscious triangle around Vivian's desk. Sterling provided the framework of experience, methodically working through the logical possibility. Vasquez offered insights into the human element, reading the psychological clues that physical evidence couldn't reveal. Chen supplied the scientific backbone, finding the microscopic details that could prove or disprove their theories. Heart attack, Sterling concluded after his initial assessment. Stress-induced, probably brought on by some business crisis we don't know about yet. The locked door, the peaceful scene. It all supports natural causes. Vasquez shook her head slightly. Look at her hands. No clutching at her chest. No signs of distress. People having heart attacks don't usually maintain this kind of composure. And her facial expression. She looks almost surprised, like something unexpected happened, but not something painful. Chen was focused on entirely different details. The pen on the floor is a Parker fountain pen, worth about $300. Vivian Ashworth doesn't strike me as the type to drop expensive items carelessly. And there's something else. He pointed to a slight discoloration on the desk surface. This mark suggests something was placed here recently, something that left a residue. As they worked, Each detective began forming their own theory about what had happened in the locked gallery office. Sterling's experience told him to look for the simplest explanation. A wealthy woman under stress had suffered a medical emergency. Vasquez's psychological training suggested something more complex, a scenario involving trust and betrayal. Chen's forensic mind was already cataloguing inconsistencies that pointed toward deliberate deception. But what none of them realized was that their every move was being anticipated. Somewhere in the city, a brilliant mind was watching their investigation unfold, having planned for exactly this moment. The killer had studied each of their methods, their strengths, their blind spots. The evidence they were finding had been carefully placed. The clues they were following had been deliberately constructed. The game had begun, and the three detectives were playing by rules they didn't even know existed. As they continued their individual examinations of the scene, each confident in their expertise, they failed to notice that they were being guided down precisely the paths their unknown adversary wanted them to follow. The morning sun climbed higher, casting new shadows across the gallery floor, and with each passing minute, the killer's plan moved closer to its ultimate goal. The three brilliant minds of Sterling, Vasquez, and Chen were about to discover that sometimes intelligence alone isn't enough to see through a perfectly constructed illusion. Everything she thought she knew about death. The three detectives gathered around the examination table as Dr. Holbrook began her preliminary finding. The sterile smell of disinfectant mixed with something else, an almost sweet scent that seemed to cling to Vivian's clothing. Initial examination shows no obvious trauma, Holbrook announced, her voice echoing in the tiled room. No bruising, no defensive wound, no signs of struggle whatsoever. Sterling leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. So we're looking at natural causes, heart attack, stroke, something like that. But even as he asked the question, his instincts told him the answer wouldn't be that simple. That's what I expected to find, Holbrook, pulling back Vivian's eyelids to examine her pupil. But look at this. She pointed to tiny hemorrhages in the whites of the victim's eye. Petechial hemorrhaging, but not the pattern you'd see from strangulation or suffocation. This suggests something else entirely. Vasquez studied the body with her psychologist's eye for detail. Her expression is peaceful, almost serene. People who die from heart attacks or strokes typically show some distress, some indication of pain or struggle. She looks like she simply went to sleep. Chen was already taking samples, his forensic mind working through possibility. Dr. Holbrook, I'd like to request a full toxicology screen. Something about this doesn't add up to natural causes. 3 hours later, the preliminary toxicology results arrived, and they changed everything. Dr. Holbrook called the detectives back to the morgue, her usually composed demeanor showing cracks of excitement and concern. "Gentlemen, lady," she began, "we're dealing with something extremely sophisticated." She pulled up the lab results on her computer screen, pointing to a series of chemical compounds that looked like alphabet soup to the detective. Vivian Ashworth was poisoned, but not with anything you'd find in your average murder. This is aconitine, derived from the wolfsbane plant, but it's been chemically modified. Sterling frowned. Modified how? Someone with extensive knowledge of chemistry, probably a PhD-level understanding, has altered the molecular structure to make it nearly undetectable. In its natural form, aconitine would show up in standard toxicology screens. But this version, she shook her head. If Chen hadn't specifically requested the extended analysis, we would have missed it entirely. The implications hit all three detectives simultaneously. This wasn't a crime of passion or a spur-of-the-moment decision. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating a poison that would kill cleanly and leave virtually no trace. Vasquez was the first to voice what they were all thinking. We're dealing with someone who understands both chemistry and investigative procedures. They knew exactly how to make this look like natural causes. Chen was already making notes, his mind racing through the forensic implications. The delivery method would be crucial. Aconitine can be absorbed through the skin, ingested or injected. Given the lack of injection sites and the peaceful nature of her death, I'd guess it was in something she consumed. The coffee, Sterling said immediately. It was still warm when the security guard found her, but the cup was tested for prints. Only hers were on it, which means our killer was careful enough to avoid leaving evidence, but sophisticated enough to create an untraceable poison, Holbrook added. This isn't your typical murder weapon. This is the work of someone with serious scientific knowledge. As the detectives absorbed this information, the true scope of their challenge began to emerge. They weren't just hunting a killer. They were facing a criminal mastermind who had anticipated their investigative methods and planned accordingly. The peaceful death scene, the locked room, The lack of obvious evidence, it had all been orchestrated. Chen examined the clothing samples he had collected from the scene. If the poison was delivered in her coffee, then someone had access to it before she drank it. But the security cameras show no one entering the gallery except Vivian herself. Unless, Vasquez said slowly, someone was already there when she arrived, hidden, waiting. Sterling shook his head. The building was searched thoroughly. No hiding places, no signs that anyone had been there overnight. Dr. Holbrook looked up from her examination notes. There's something else. The concentration of the poison suggests she died within minutes of ingestion. Whoever did this was precise about the dosage, enough to kill quickly and quietly, but not so much that it would be obvious in a standard autopsy. The room fell silent as the three detectives contemplated their adversary. This wasn't a jealous spouse or a desperate business partner acting on impulse. This was someone who had studied their methods, anticipated their responses, and planned every detail with scientific precision. As they left the morgue, each detective carried with them the sobering realization that they were outmatched in ways they had never experienced before. The killer had demonstrated a level of sophistication that challenged everything they thought they knew about criminal investigation. But they also carried something else, the first real piece of evidence that could lead them to their target. The hunt for a criminal mastermind had officially begun, and none of them suspected that their every move was being watched, analyzed, and anticipated by the very person they sought to catch. Hunt for a criminal mastermind. By the following morning, the three detectives had divided their focus among the most promising suspects, each bringing their unique expertise to bear on what was rapidly becoming the most complex case of their career. Detective Sterling took point on investigating Damien Blackwood, Vivian's business partner of 15 years. At 61, Blackwood was a distinguished man with silver hair and the kind of refined bearing that came from old money and older connections. He operated out of a penthouse office overlooking the financial district, surrounded by art that rivaled Vivian's own collection. Vivian and I built this business together, Blackwood explained, his voice carrying the cultured accent of someone educated. Her death is not just a personal tragedy, it's a catastrophic loss for the artwork. But Sterling noticed how Blackwood's hands trembled slightly when he reached for his coffee, and how his eyes never quite met the detective's gaze when discussing their recent business disagreements. The financial records told a different story than Blackwood's composed exterior suggested. Sterling discovered that Vivian had been systematically buying out her partner's shares in their most lucrative ventures. 3 major acquisitions in the past 6 months had been structured to exclude Blackwood entirely, effectively pushing him toward the margins of a business he had helped create. She was forcing me out, Blackwood finally admitted when confronted with the documents. $20 million in commissions this year alone, and she was cutting me out of deals I had negotiated myself. But murder? Detective Sterling, I'm 61 years old with a heart condition. I couldn't physically overpower anyone, let alone someone as strong-willed as Vivian. Sterling noted the alibi carefully. Blackwood claimed to have been at his cardiologist's office at the time of Vivian's death, a story that was easily verifiable. But the detective's instincts told him that physical overpowering wasn't what they were dealing with. The sophisticated poison suggested intelligence and planning, not brute force. Meanwhile, Detective Vasquez was conducting a psychological evaluation of Sophia Reeves, Vivian's 28-year-old personal assistant. The young woman sat in the gallery's conference room, her designer clothes and perfectly styled blonde hair projecting an image of competence and success. But Vasquez had learned to read the micro-expressions that revealed the truth beneath polished surfaces. Mrs. Ashworth was demanding, Sophia said carefully, her fingers unconsciously twisting her engagement ring. She expected perfection in everything, her schedule, her correspondence, her coffee preparation. Everything had to be exactly as she specified. Vasquez leaned forward slightly, employing the subtle body language techniques that encouraged confession. That must have been stressful. Did you feel appreciated for your efforts? The question hit its mark. Sophia's carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment, revealing a flash of bitter resentment before she reassembled her professional mask. I discovered last week that she was planning to fire me, she admitted. After 3 years of 18-hour days, of sacrificing my personal life for her convenience, she was going to replace me with someone more suited to her evolving needs. The motive was clear, but Vasquez probed deeper. Where did you learn about her decision to let you go? I saw the termination letter on her desk. She'd already drafted it, just hadn't found the right moment to deliver it. Sophia's voice carried a barely controlled anger. that suggested deeper psychological wounds than simple job loss. Vasquez made detailed notes about Sofia's emotional state, her intimate knowledge of Vivienne's routines, and her access to the victim's private space. The young woman knew exactly how Vivienne took her, had keys to the gallery, and possessed the intelligence to research exotic porn. But her alibi was also solid. Security cameras at her apartment showed her leaving for a morning jog at the exact time Vivienne was being poisoned. Detective Chen was pursuing the most enigmatic lead of all, the mysterious art forger known only as the Phantom. This shadowy figure had been creating perfect replicas of famous works for over a decade, staying one step ahead of international art fraud investigators. Vivienne had been building a case against the Phantom for months, threatening to expose an operation that had cost collectors worldwide hundreds of millions of dollars. Chen's investigation led him through a labyrinth of art dealers, auction houses, and private collectors who spoke of the Phantom in hushed, almost reverent tone. The forger's work was so perfect that experts often couldn't distinguish the copies from originals without sophisticated scientific analysis. Vivienne had identified at least 12 pieces in major collections that she believed were Phantom forgeries, explained Dr. Rebecca Morrison, an art authentication expert who had been working with Vivienne. She was planning to go public with her findings next month. It would have destroyed the Phantom's reputation and probably led to criminal charges, but the Phantom remained a ghost, leaving no fingerprints, no DNA, no clear trail that investigators could follow. Even Chen's meticulous forensic approach yielded only fragments, a particular type of canvas here, a specific paint formulation there, that suggested someone with access to museum-quality materials and decades of artistic training. As the day progressed, the three detectives reconvened to share their findings. The conference room at police headquarters felt heavy with the weight of their discovery. Each suspect had compelling motive, yet each also possessed alibis that seemed unshakable. Blackwood has the financial motive and the sophistication to plan something like this, Sterling reported, but his medical records confirm he was at his cardiologist's office when Vivienne died. Multiple witnesses, medical staff, even time-stamped EKG readings. Vasquez nodded grimly. Sophia Reeves has the psychological profile of someone capable of murder, repressed anger, intimate knowledge of the victim's habits, and access to her private spaces. But the security footage from her building is ironclad. She was 3 miles away when the poisoning occurred. Chen spread out photos of forged artworks across the table. The Phantom has the most to lose from Vivienne's investigation and the intelligence to create an undetectable poison. But tracking this person is like chasing smoke. No physical evidence, no confirmed identity, no way to establish where they were at the time of the murder. The frustration in the room was palpable. 3 experienced detectives, each expert in their field, were being outmaneuvered by someone who seemed to understand their methods better than they understood themselves. What they didn't realize was that their investigation was unfolding exactly as their quarry had planned. Every lead they followed, every suspect they interviewed, every piece of evidence they analyzed had been carefully orchestrated to keep them moving in circles. The real killer was watching their progress with the satisfaction of a chess master who could see victory 20 moves ahead. The web of suspects was more than just a collection of people with motives. It was a carefully constructed maze designed to trap the very investigators who thought they were hunting the architect of the crime. Find a manila envelope on his desk with no postmark, no return address, and no indication of how it had arrived. Inside was a single photograph, the 3 detectives standing around Vivienne's body in the gallery, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been inside the building during their initial investigation. Vasquez and Chen received identical envelopes within the hour. The message was clear. They were being watched, studied, manipulated by someone who had been steps ahead of them from the very beginning. "This changes everything," Sterling muttered, examining the photograph with a magnifying. The image quality was professional, taken with expensive equipment by someone who understood surveillance photography. "Our killer isn't just intelligent. They're actively monitoring our investigation." Chen was already analyzing the paper and ink composition of the photograph, but his usual confidence was shaken. "Whoever took this had to be in the gallery during our initial crime scene examination. That means they either have legitimate access to the building, or they're sophisticated enough to bypass security systems without leaving a trace." The psychological implications weren't lost on Vasquez. "This is psychological warfare. They want us to know they're watching, want us to second-guess every move we make. The question is, why reveal themselves now?" The answer came sooner than expected. Over the next 48 hours, evidence began disappearing and reappearing in ways that defied logical explanation. Security footage from the gallery's cameras mysteriously corrupted for a 3-hour window on the night before Vivian's death. A witness who had reported seeing a suspicious figure near the gallery suddenly recanted their statement, claiming they had been mistaken. Most disturbing of all, the coffee cup from Vivian's desk, the one piece of physical evidence that might contain traces of how the poison was delivered, vanished from the evidence room despite multiple layers of security. Sterling found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about police procedure. 30 years on the force, and I've never seen evidence manipulation this sophisticated. It's like they have someone inside our operation. But Chen's forensic analysis suggested something even more unsettling. The evidence isn't just disappearing, it's being replaced. This isn't simple theft, it's systematic. Substitution designed to mislead our investigation. He held up a fragment of the original coffee cup that he had kept in his personal kit for additional analysis. The cup that disappeared from evidence and the fragment I retained don't match. Someone replaced the original with a replica before stealing it. The realization that they were dealing with someone who could manipulate evidence from within the police department sent shockwaves through their investigation. Trust began to erode as each detective wondered who else might be involved in the conspiracy. Vasquez conducted psychological profiles on everyone who had access to the evidence room, but found nothing that suggested internal corruption. Either our killer has an accomplice we haven't identified, or they're sophisticated enough to manipulate our systems without inside help. As the investigation entered its second week, the pattern of manipulation became more apparent and more disturbing. Witnesses changed their statement, often reporting phone calls from police officers, asking them to clarify their previous testimony. Security systems at key locations experienced convenient malfunctions at crucial moments. Even the detectives' own case files began showing subtle alteration, dates changed by a day, names spelled slightly differently, crucial details modified in ways that seemed like clerical errors, but undermined the coherence of their investigation. Sterling began keeping handwritten notes in a personal journal, not trusting the computerized case management system. "Someone is rewriting our investigation in real time," he told his partners during a secure meeting in his car, away from potentially compromised office space. "Every lead we follow seems to have been prepared for us in advance." The psychological toll was evident in all three detectives. Chen became obsessively secretive about his evidence collection, personally transporting samples to independent laboratory rather than trusting the police forensics. Vasquez found herself analyzing her own partners, wondering if their behavioral changes indicated involvement in the conspiracy. Sterling started carrying a personal recording device, documenting every conversation and decision to protect himself against future manipulation. But their unknown adversary was just getting started. On the 10th day of the investigation, a new piece of evidence appeared, seemed to solve everything. A suicide note in Vivian Ashworth's handwriting, discovered in a safe deposit box that had somehow been overlooked in the initial financial investigation. The note detailed Vivian's despair over terminal cancer, her decision to end her life with dignity, and her careful plan to make her suicide appear natural to spare her reputation and the art community the scandal of her condition. Medical records materialized, showing regular visits to an oncologist, confirming an aggressive form of cancer that would have killed her within months. For a moment, the three detectives felt relief. The sophisticated poison, the locked room, the lack of suspects with opportunity. It all made sense if Vivian had orchestrated her own death. But Chen's scientific mind rejected the convenient solution. The handwriting analysis will take weeks to complete properly, he insisted, and these medical records appeared too conveniently. If Vivian had cancer, why wasn't her regular physician aware of it? Vasquez agreed. The psychological profile doesn't fit. Vivian Ashworth was a fighter, someone who conquered challenges rather than surrendering to them. Suicide is inconsistent with everything we know about her personality. Sterling's experience told him that cases this complex rarely resolve themselves with convenient discoveries. Someone wants us to close this investigation. The question is why now, and what are they afraid we'll discover if we keep digging? Their decision to continue the investigation, despite the apparent suicide evidence, triggered the most aggressive manipulation yet. Phone records were altered to suggest the detectives were pursuing the case for personal gain. Anonymous complaints were filed against all three, alleging excessive use of resources on a closed case. Pressure mounted from their superiors to accept the suicide conclusion and move on to other cases. But what their tormentor didn't anticipate was how the constant manipulation would strengthen the detectives' resolve rather than breaking it. Being pushed toward a conclusion made them more determined to uncover the truth, not less. As the investigation entered its third week, Chen made a decision that would change everything. He returned to the original crime scene one final time, determined to find something, anything, that their sophisticated adversary might have overlooked in their elaborate scheme. What? He discovered there would prove that sometimes the smallest detail can unravel even the most carefully constructed deception. Detective James Chen stood alone in the Ashworth Gallery at 3 a.m., 3 weeks after Vivian's death. The building was officially sealed, but he had convinced the night security guard to let him conduct one final examination. His colleagues thought he was obsessing over a case that had been solved with Vivian's supposed suicide, but Chen's scientific mind couldn't accept the convenient conclusion that had materialized so perfect. The gallery felt different in the darkness, shadows cast by his flashlight creating an almost supernatural atmosphere among the priceless artwork. Chen had been here a dozen times before, but tonight he was looking with different eyes, not for what was present, but for what might have been missed in the chaos of the initial investigation. He methodically retraced every step of their original crime scene, analysis, photographing surfaces from angles they hadn't considered before. The killer had been incredibly thorough in cleaning up evidence, but Chen knew that perfection was impossible. Somewhere in this room was the mistake that would expose their elaborate deception. It was near the edge of Vivian's desk, caught between two pieces of wood in the ornate carved molding, that Chen found it. A single strand of hair, so fine it was nearly invisible, trapped in a position where it could only have been deposited after Vivian's death. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully extracted it with tweezers, placing it in a sterile evidence container. The hair was blonde, approximately 12 inches long, with what appeared to be recent chemical treatment. Chen immediately knew it didn't belong to Vivian, whose silver hair was naturally grey and cut in a short, professional style. More importantly, the hair's position suggested it had been left by someone who had leaned over Vivian's body after she had collapsed. Back at his private laboratory, he no longer trusted the police forensics department. Chen began the most crucial analysis of his career. DNA extraction from a single hair follicle was delicate work, requiring techniques at the cutting edge of forensic science. As the genetic profile emerged, Chen felt his blood run cold. The DNA belonged to Sophia Reeves, Vivian's assistant, but this contradicted everything they had established about the case. Sophia had an ironclad alibi. Security cameras had captured her leaving her apartment building for a morning jog at precisely the time Vivian was being poisoned 3 miles away. Chen stared at the results for hours, running additional tests to confirm what seemed impossible. The hair definitely belonged to Sophia, but she couldn't have been in 2 places at once, unless... The revelation hit him like a physical blow. The security footage, the convenient alibis, the sophisticated poison, the manipulation of evidence. It hadn't been designed to frame innocent suspects. It had been designed to provide cover for the real killer while they committed the perfect crime. Chen pulled up the security footage from Sophia's apartment building on his computer, studying it with the enhanced analytical software he kept for the most complex cases. Frame by frame, he examined the woman who appeared to be Sophia Reeves leaving for her morning jog. The height was right. The build was correct. Even the clothing matched what Sophia had claimed to be wearing. But the woman in the footage never looked directly at the camera. Her face was consistently angled away, obscured by shadows, or hidden beneath a baseball cap. The gait was slightly different from Sophia's normal walk. Most tellingly, the timestamp on the security footage showed signs of digital manipulation, subtle alterations that would have been invisible to normal investigation, but were detectable with Chen's advanced equipment. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Sophia hadn't just planned Vivian's murder. She had orchestrated an elaborate performance designed to give her the perfect alibi while she committed the crime. The sophisticated poison, the locked room mystery, the manipulation of evidence, it had all been a distraction from the simple truth that the killer had been hiding in plain sight. Chen realized that Sophia possessed all the qualities unknown mastermind had demonstrated. She had intimate knowledge of Vivian's routines, access to her private spaces, and the intelligence to research exotic poisons. Her background in chemistry, something that had never come up in Vasquez's psychological evaluation, gave her the expertise to create the undetectable poison that had killed her employer. But most importantly, Sophia understood police investigative procedures well enough to manipulate. 3 years as Vivian's assistant had given her extensive contact with security companies, private investigators, and law enforcement officials. She knew exactly how the investigation would unfold and had prepared. The single strand of hair, overlooked in the initial crime scene examination and missed during her careful, was the thread that unraveled her perfect crime. As Chen prepared to contact his partners with the shocking revelation, he realized that Sophia Reeves had committed what might have been the most sophisticated murder in the city's history. The only question remaining was, what would she do when she discovered that her perfect plan had been exposed by the smallest of oversights?